Now, you know, I have a time or two pointed out some of the, I would say, salient talking points on the part of Tucker Carlson. And I think he does do a reasonable job of covering a lot of key issues. But I also think that when push comes to shove, he does have a nativist streak in him, and he will revert back to a lot of the talking points that he's grown accustomed to over the years. Now, why am I playing this segment, and why do I think it matters? Tucker Carlson recently met with Trump at the White House. Now, I have my thoughts in terms of why that happened. Now you're going to hear a very interesting dissertation, if you will, from Mr. Carlson, in particular when it comes to immigration.
Could be a much larger and much more destructive version of the 2020 George Floyd riots, which really helped no American whatsoever, certainly didn't help black people, but made these same groups much more powerful. Who are these people now? Well, first among them is the governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, the man who ran for vice president a year and a half ago. This is a guy who is in the middle of the biggest political scandal in his state's history. It's the Somali welfare scam.
So already he's leaning in on this scam. Now, again, is it plausible that there has been a scam that has been perpetuated on the people of Minneapolis for the past several years? Yeah, certainly it's possible. And right off the bat, he's making it as a systemic problem within, he's now saying the state, not a specific neighborhood, a specific region. This is a overarching problem in the state of Minnesota. But why is he going after Tim Walz? And why is he seemingly getting behind what's going on here? Well, he's got more to say.
That has just been exposed. And a month ago, Tim Walz was in disgrace. And now Tim Walz is the leader of the insurrection against the Orange Man. So you can see already the benefit is there. So it probably shouldn't surprise you that Tim Walz is on television and social media constantly encouraging the kind of violence that you've been watching on Instagram. Here's one example, Tim Walz.
We have got children in Minnesota hiding in their houses, afraid to go outside. Many of us grew up reading that story of Anne Frank. Somebody's going to write that children's story about Minnesota.
Someone's going to write that story about Minnesota. Now, he's referring to Anne Frank, of course, the little Jewish girl who was killed in a Nazi concentration camp after hiding for more than a year with her family in the secret alcove from the Nazis. It's a story that most American children are very familiar with. And it's the most terrifying possible thing you could ever say to a population, that the president of the United States and his armed agents are going to kill you like they did Anne Frank. So the people I'm opposed to are not simply Nazis in some theoretical sense. They're coming here to round you and your children up and take them to a death camp.
Now, I have stated my position on ICE, I think, pretty clearly. We don't need this Gestapo out in the streets because in the end, the problem is never going to correct itself until you deal with the very people that want floodgates open at the border and the constant revolving door of what goes on when it comes to immigration. Now, most of you know I'm a hardliner on immigration, but I'm also logical and nuanced about this issue. If you want to protect labor, workers' rights in this country, you have to accept the reality about controlled immigration. However, if you think for 1 second that this is not an issue that is deliberately perpetuated by the powers that be, including many people in the Epstein files, mind you, that is how it's done. It's done on purpose. You allow a lot of people in, you create tons of jobs to drag them out. And we're going to discuss this on Monday with Jen in a little bit more detail regarding what the ICE agents actually are required to do and how they actually get paid it's pretty sickening when you think about it. They're basically paid on quotas. You have to round up a certain amount of people to get your bread. You wonder why so many people are getting picked off that are actual US citizens? It's not a question of whether they care or not. It's a question of whether or not they're able to make their quotas because this is a job. Again, the defense, what is the job? The job is pretty clear. We want to kick as many people out of this country to make it seem like we're really doing a job. We're going to let them all back in, or another round of them will come back in through the back. They're all going out the front door. A whole bunch of people are coming in through the back door. And why is that? Because it's all about shareholders and the bottom line. That's all it's ever been about. That's all it ever will be about. And that is never changing. And I mean ever. Ever changing. Unless there is revolutionary change in this country. So the idea that you're going to hone in on what's going on in Minnesota and not identify what the real problem is. And I'm not even addressing whether or not you want to go and deal with the illegal immigration issue in Miami or El Paso, Texas. No. What you're really wanting to deal with here is a political distraction, an economic distraction from the fact that our country is falling apart. And Tucker is now facilitating a role that he's very good at. He's very good at this. He knows exactly how to push the buttons. And why is he doing this? Because the GOP, in particular the Trump administration, is desperate. They see the numbers. They know what's likely coming in the midterms. So they're trying to stop it dead in its tracks. Now, as we highlighted on the last live stream, we saw the Zio scum from Israel lamenting the fact that Trump has been hobnobbing with Tucker Carlson. Why is that? Because in the end, as I've said before, and this gets back to the Israelis, you're only as good as the money and power that you can provide as well as control. And if you are no longer viable for the means of winning elections and maintaining a power and a financial power vacuum, then you're not worth the shit of the money that it's printed on. But Tucker Carlson does have power and he does have influence. And right now, his influence is much bigger and much grander than Lil Ben Shapiro and his cohorts. So naturally, they're going to lean on Tucker. And Tucker knows how to use that power.
That's what the governor of Minnesota is saying in public in the middle of the most volatile rioting his state has seen maybe ever, maybe even more than what we saw 5 years ago, maybe even scarier than that. And here's the governor saying it's worse this time, to the death camps. Why would you say something like that? In order to calm things down? No. In order to gin up fear, which is, of course, the fastest way to control people by terrifying them, making them so afraid that they will believe anything you tell them, they will follow any command you give them. And, like the Japanese in the South Pacific, they'll jump off the cliff into the sea because they've been so convinced that the invading army is going to eat them and rape their children that they will die before they submit. That is what he is telling his people in the state. So just to be clear, 2 Americans were killed by ICE officers, and we can debate whether or not that was justified. It was sad, and everybody should admit it was sad and bad. It's always sad when Americans die, period.
No, Tucker, I think it is fair to say that they did not deserve to die. Now, you can argue that they were getting in the way, and you can debate all you want about whether or not they should have been arrested for disorderly conduct. But the idea that there is any justification behind their assassinations, nope. There is no line there. There is no blurred line whatsoever. It's pretty clear. I see what Tucker's doing. Do I think that Tucker agrees with what ICE did? No, I don't think he agrees at all. But I think he also understands where his audience is at and where people are on this issue. We have people here that support our channel, that actually agree with ICE and think they should be doing this. They don't agree with Israel. They agree with us on a lot of issues. But this is an issue where they actually feel that ICE should be doing what they're doing because we have an illegal immigration problem in this country. Okay, so let's assume that that is the case. You really think that that's what's going to prevent it from happening again? Or is it possible that this is just a ring around the rosy problem that is never going to end? It is a jobs program. It is a money-making scheme that's been going on ever since 9/11, because that's where ICE came from. ICE enforcement came after 9/11. All of these programs. And now we know that 9/11 was an inside job, so you can't tell me that this wasn't planned. We know it was. In the end, it's all about money and power, no matter how you try to nuance it. But he's good at doing that.
But watching that, the deaths of those two people would make any normal person say, whoa, 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 let's cool this down. And by the way, to restate, to his great credit, the Trump administration has had that response and has gone to Tim Walz and said, whoa, let's cool this down. Tim Walz's response, no, because he's benefiting from it. That's why. And by the way, another point that I think should be clear to everybody at this moment, anyone in Washington still advocating for some new foreign war on behalf of a foreign power, by definition, doesn't care about this country.
Now, I really wish he would have just said Israel, but this is how you know that there is the grand bargain between Trump and Tucker Carlson. He basically told him, I will fight on behalf of the immigration issue, but I am not, under any circumstances, fighting on the part of Israel. Take it or leave it. You want to avoid getting wiped out in the midterms? I still get to say what I have to say about Israel, period. And Trump folded, said, yeah, that's fine. And that's why all the Zios are now hitting Trump for even engaging Tucker Carlson, because Tucker is not going to bend the knee on that issue. Tucker has always been a nativist when it comes to immigration. That's not a new thing. So this was kind of an easy pull, but they made him an offer. They said, we're going to get absolutely shellacked in the midterms. Is there anything you could do to help us? So he probably had his list of demands. And this was the first official video he put together after that meeting. This is new, brand new. And you can tell that Tucker is definitely holding the cards.
If you're still pushing the White House to launch a war on Iran, and a regime change war later this month on Iran, as your own country is devolving into chaos, then I don't think we need to guess about where your priorities are. You just don't care about the United States and what happens to it. Of course, we knew that. This morning, Lindsey Graham is tweeting about the brave Kurds as the United States comes unraveled. And Lindsey Graham's concern is about the Kurds. Now, at some point, we're going to have to think about how did Lindsey Graham and people like Lindsey Graham wind up running our Congress? How they wind up with all of this authority? How did we ever put people like that in charge of us, who in a moment of crisis are tweeting about the brave Kurds, whoever they are? But there still are, as of right now, people in Washington, Mark Levin, and many others who are so indifferent to what happens to what is supposedly their country that they are still focused on some other neocon adventure in the Middle East on somebody else's behalf. It has nothing to do with us at all.
When I think of somebody like Lindsey Graham, and I think about the person who confronted him earlier this week in Congress, just saying, hey, Lindsey, can't you just admit that you're gay and stop allowing people to bribe you for the rest of your life? No, unfortunately, Lindsey Graham is going to be bribed until he's dead. And then, of course, eventually people will just come to terms with the reality that is one nation under blackmail. And Tucker, again, he can be exceptionally correct, as he is here, or exceptionally wrong, as he was at the beginning. So in many respects, it's a hot or cold issue with him. You're going to like a lot of it. You're going to hate a lot of it. Choose the good with the bad. As we saw with a couple of guests recently, the young gentleman who came on, Jeb Bow and Nikki Rudd, they're very much like Tucker. They're like young Tuckers. They see politics in a similar vein. And so finding that balance is tough, but it's worth trying. That's a good point.
Until this is solved, until the chaos is quelled, until there's some broad agreement on where we go next, we not only have no time for a new neocon war, that is destruction, clearly. And by the way, it is in a moment like this that foreign powers looking at us sense weakness, vulnerability. Oh, you've got aircraft carriers in the Persian Gulf planning a new strike on the Ayatollah in Iran? Oh, gold is over $5,000 an ounce? Ooh, looks like the dollar's in trouble. Now is the time to move. Weakness invites aggression, and we are not in a strong place right now because our nation itself, the actual United States, the place that we supposedly care about most, is not in a strong place. It can be, we can fix this, but until we do, no. Anyone who's still talking about any of that nonsense, Gaza, Iran, should be called out immediately as someone who just doesn't care about Americans.
And that is where Tucker is wrong. Gaza is America because the war raged by the Israelis on the Gazans is coming home to roost here. That is the Gestapo. That is ICE. ICE is trained by the IOF, excuse me, sorry. And as much as I agree, Trump, or in this case, Tucker is being very nuanced because he has Trump right where he wants him. Remember, Trump and Tucker do not like each other. In many respects, politics is just a means to an end. And somebody like Tucker uses it very effectively. However, you have to be realistic about what he's saying here. What he's saying is that we can do away with Israel, but we need to have a hard line on immigration. Take with that what you will. But this is an example of power politics in real time. There's a reason that Tucker met with President Trump, because he knows he's vulnerable. And he knows they're desperate. So he's leaning on it. He's leaning on an issue that he's always been passionate about, which is immigration, but he's also added the caveat of Israel into the equation. That's power. And that's why the Zios are losing their fucking minds over this guy. Because he knows how to play it well. He does. You can't hate the player, you hate the game, but my God, he plays it well.